The night was unusually still in the small town of Ridgefield. Streetlights flickered faintly, casting long shadows across empty sidewalks. It was the kind of place where nothing much ever happened, at least that's what people believed. Officer Daniel adjusted his patrol cap and glanced at the loyal figure trotting beside him. Shadow, his K9 partner, moved with silent precision, ears alert, eyes scanning every corner. "Another quiet shift," Daniel muttered, though a part of him felt the quiet was almost too quiet. The faint crunch of gravel echoed beneath their boots and paws as they passed shuttered shops and dimly lit porches. Families slept peacefully behind locked doors, unaware that danger had been lurking much closer than anyone imagined. Shadow's presence always reassured Daniel. The dog wasn't just a partner, he was family. Trained, disciplined, and fiercely loyal. But tonight, Daniel sensed something in the air, a weight pressing down on the silence. A night that had begun like any other was about to take a chilling turn. They had walked this path dozens of times before. Same route, same quiet streets. But tonight, Shadow stopped suddenly. The K9 froze in his tracks, muscles stiff, ears pointing sharply toward the end of the road. His nose twitched, pulling in the cold night air. Then, without warning, he let out a low, guttural growl. Daniel frowned. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly, his hand tightening on the leash. Shadow didn't move. His dark eyes locked onto something in the distance. And then, slowly, Daniel followed his gaze. At the far end of the street stood a decaying house. Its windows were broken, roof sagging, and the front porch tilted as if the whole place was sinking into the earth. Most people in Ridgefield didn't even look at it anymore. They called it cursed, forgotten. But Shadow wouldn't take his eyes off it. His growl grew louder, his tail rigid, every muscle braced. And then he barked, deep, sharp, relentless. A warning that chilled Daniel's blood. Daniel hesitated, his eyes narrowing at the crumbling structure ahead. The house looked abandoned for years, its walls streaked with mold, shutters dangling loosely, and weeds clawing up the porch steps. Still, Shadow's barking grew louder, sharper, demanding attention. "Easy, boy, easy," Daniel whispered, though his own pulse was quickening. Shadow lunged forward, tugging hard on the leash. His claws scraped against the cracked pavement as he tried to pull Daniel closer to the house. He wasn't just curious, he was desperate. From across the street, an elderly man leaned on his gate, shaking his head. "That place," he muttered under his breath. "Bad things happen there. Best you leave it alone." Daniel glanced at him, unsettled. He'd heard whispers before, rumors of children who had gone missing, families left with no answers. But no one had ever tied those stories to this decaying house. Shadow wouldn't let go. He scratched at the ground, barked again, and his eyes burned with urgency. Something Daniel realized wasn't right at all. Daniel's breath caught as Shadow dragged him closer to the porch. The wooden boards groaned under their weight, each step sounding like a warning in the silent night. The front door was slightly ajar, swaying on rusted hinges. A stale, musty odor seeped through the crack, heavy with dust and something else, something Daniel couldn't place. Shadow shoved his nose forward, whining, then let out another sharp bark. Without hesitation, the dog pushed through the opening. "Shadow, wait!" Daniel hissed, but the K9 was already inside. The beam of Daniel's flashlight cut through the darkness. Cobwebs stretched across corners, broken furniture lay scattered, and graffiti covered the peeling wallpaper. But it was the silence that unnerved him most. Thick, suffocating silence. Then, faintly, he heard it. A sound. A soft, almost unrecognizable whimper, drifting through the house. Shadow's ears twitched. He growled low, leading Daniel deeper into the hallway. Each step brought them closer to a truth Daniel wasn't sure he wanted to face. Something, or someone was inside. Shadow's nails clicked against the warped floorboards as he pulled Daniel down the narrow hallway. The air grew colder, heavier with every step. At the end of the corridor, Shadow stopped. His nose pressed against a panel of wood, old and splintered. Then, with a sudden force, he began to scratch, paw after paw, frantic, determined. Daniel crouched, shining his flashlight low. His breath caught. There it was. A seam in the floorboards, a door, a hidden entry, barely visible beneath layers of dust. "Good boy! You found something," Daniel whispered, his voice shaky. Shadow barked sharply, circling the spot, his tail stiff as a rod. Daniel grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Rust held it tight. He radioed in quickly, his voice urgent. Requesting backup at 5th and Oak. Possible concealed structure inside residence. The scratching sound from beneath the floor made him freeze. Not rats. Not pipes. Something alive was down there, and Shadow knew it. The backup arrived quickly. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop outside the crumbling house. Officers rushed in, flashlights cutting through the gloom. Daniel pointed to the concealed hatch. "Here, help me pry it open." Crowbars dug into the edges. The wood creaked, groaned, and finally split apart. A rush of damp, cold air spilled upward, carrying with it the faint sound of sobbing. Shadow barked furiously, tail rigid, urging them on. One officer shined his light down the narrow staircase. His face paled. "Oh my God!" Daniel descended first, his boots echoing against the stone steps. And then he froze. Huddled together in the shadows were children. Dozens of them. Their eyes wide, cheeks hollow, clothes torn. Terrified, but alive. 23. An officer whispered in disbelief as he began counting. The children recoiled at first, shielding their faces. But when Shadow trotted forward, tail low and gentle, a small boy reached out, touching the dog with trembling fingers. Relief and hope flooded the room. They had been found. Chaos erupted as officers scrambled to act. Radios crackled with urgent calls for ambulances, child services, and medical units. "Get blankets down here. We need medics now," Daniel shouted, his voice echoing off the damp basement walls. The children, weak and frightened, hesitated to move. Their eyes darted nervously from one officer to another. But Shadow stepped forward, tail wagging slowly, his body low and calm. One by one, the children reached for him, their tiny hands clinging to his fur. Shadow guided them gently, leading the first group up the stairs. His presence was the bridge between fear and safety. Officers formed a protective line, lifting the children into waiting arms. Some cried softly, others simply stared, their faces pale and hollow. Daniel knelt to reassure a young girl. "You're safe now. We're taking you home." As the last child was carried out, Shadow remained at Daniel's side, watchful, refusing to rest. The nightmare inside that house was ending, and a rescue was finally underway. By the time the ambulances arrived, the street outside the abandoned house was crowded with neighbors. Word spread faster than sirens. Families who had long feared the worst came running, their faces etched with desperation. When the first child was carried out, a mother screamed, pushing through the crowd. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her little boy as tears streamed down her face. "My baby! Oh God, my baby!" One by one, the children were reunited with loved ones. The air was filled with sobs, gasps, and cries of relief. Officers stood silently, moved by the raw emotion unfolding before them. Shadow stayed close, pacing between the children as if still guarding them. Tiny hands reached for him, stroking his fur, whispering thank yous through trembling lips. Reporters arrived, cameras flashing, documenting every moment. The once-forgotten house now stood as the center of the town's darkest secret, and its most miraculous rescue. Ridgefield had been haunted by disappearances. Tonight, it was flooded with hope. Days later, the town gathered at the community hall. Reporters filled the front rows, families sat clutching their children, and officers stood proudly in uniform. At the center of it all was Shadow, sitting tall beside Officer Daniel. The K9's dark eyes scanned the room, calm yet alert, as though he understood the weight of the moment. The mayor stepped up to the podium. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Tonight, we honor a hero, one who cannot speak our language, yet saved lives more than words ever could. Applause thundered through the hall. Children who had been rescued ran forward, surrounding Shadow, their laughter echoing like music. One little girl kissed his muzzle and whispered, "Thank you." Daniel placed a hand on his partner's back. "You did it, boy. You saved them." His voice cracked with emotion. Shadow didn't wag or bark. He simply sat, steadfast and proud. That night, the town didn't just see a dog. They saw a legend. In the weeks that followed, the story of the abandoned house spread far beyond Ridgefield. News outlets across the country reported on the chilling discovery, each headline praising the unlikely hero, Shadow, the K9 who refused to look away. For the families, life was forever changed. 23 children were home again, their laughter slowly returning to houses that had once echoed only with grief. Parents whispered prayers of gratitude, often speaking of one name first, Shadow. Daniel, too, saw his partner in a new light. "You weren't just doing your job," he murmured one night, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "You were protecting souls." Schools began teaching the story, children drawing pictures of a brave dog who saved lives. Shadow became more than a police K9. He became a symbol of loyalty, courage, and hope. The abandoned house would eventually be torn down. But the legend of that night, the night a dog uncovered the darkest secret and gave a town back its children, would never fade. Shadow's legacy had only just begun.